There is also sometimes a situational basis for segmentation, okay, whether the person, based on the current stage, whether he's a first time buyer or whether he's a, second time or, regular buyer, the kind of use for which he's doing it. For example, you're buying a sari for a wedding as opposed to buying a sari or a salwar kameez to go for your work. It's the same product, but the situation is quite different. Your approach can be quite different. How much you're willing to spend, what you're looking for can quite change. And also how frequently you buy it. Many times, if you're looking at buying something, a food item like salt, or buying a pair of socks, your approach could be quite different as opposed to buying maybe a cell phone or a camera. So what is required for a good marketer is really looking at all these different facets, all these different angles, and coming up with what makes sense for him, taking a comprehensive view and figuring out what basis for segmentation he wants to use simultaneously. And given the complexity of many markets, especially a market in India, it's better to use a combination of an objective and a subjective approach rather than just one. Now, like we have seen before, a customer or a consumer market or a consumer behavior is quite different from how business to business markets or how organizations buy. So if you were to look at how to segment business markets, again there can be many things. It can be geographic, it can be on the basis of the behavior, it can be on the basis of the end user, or it can be based on things like customer size or in the size of the account, or in terms of how the product is finally used. Each of these can be various bases. As we have seen in an earlier discussion, there can be differences based on geography, because if you take international markets, the Indian market for the same product can be quite different from, say, how an American market would behave. The benefits sought in different markets can also change. For example, a construction industry reconditioned or second hand backhoe loaders or construction equipment might find a good market because cost considerations are quite different from how it would be, say, in a place like Japan. And if you look at readiness stage, there are quite a few products which still have yet to come to places like India, but we are getting there. Whereas some of those products, maybe in robotics, etc., are already present in places like Japan. So it all depends on the kind of aspects that you have to see, and this tells you different ways by which you can look at business to business markets, arrive at segmentation, figure out how to tackle each segment differently. So a lot of people tend to use things like size of the firm. The size of the firm can again be in different ways. The number of employees, for example, the revenues that it has, the number of manufacturing locations, and so on and so forth. But the key thing would be revenues and size and number of employees. Second is how are its buying processes? How formalized is it? Is it tender related, for example, or does it have a more structured auction process or whatever? The third is the industry sector, example mining, telecom, and so on and so forth. Typically these are bases by what that people use to segment business to business markets, with the first and the third being the most commonly used characteristics in the segmentation process. The other thing that needs to be done once you identify certain segments and look at them as potentially things that segments that you can attack, is to evaluate these segments and see whether they're worthwhile for you to target them. For example, the means that people use is to find the size of the segment, which is how big is it in terms of volume and or value for me. Okay. The second is it a segment which is growing or is it a segment which is dying? For example, if you take something like books, in America, people would look at it as, is there a e-book segment and is there a hard copy book segment? Is it that paper books are dying and e-books are growing? If it's paper books, is it the older crowd which is buying books, paper books, as opposed to the younger crowd which is buying more e-books, so on and so forth, okay? And the third thing is also the profitability. For example, if you take the American market again, DVDs generally are showing a decline overall, but fitness DVDs are showing growth. So people are saying, should I look at fitness and yoga DVDs as a sub-segment? Is there a set of people who are interested in health or health conscious and fit a certain profile whom I can target? So, and if it's more profitable, it means better, even in what seems to be a dying or a slow growth or a degrowth market like DVDs as a whole, there seems to be growth in a sub-segment. Also competitive pressure. How many people are attacking the same segment? You will find, for example, the number of TV channels giving us news in India is immense. Everybody is attacking the news segment. I don't think as yet many TV news channels are profitable. So sometimes it doesn't make sense unless one has other non-commercial considerations. And finally, it's important that the segment you choose fits with your company's objectives. Okay. For example, Islamic banking is something that people are touting, but for many companies that requires a very significant shift in how one approaches banking itself. So would that fit in with your company's objectives and its goals? So it's important for a marketer to look at various aspects and figure out how to evaluate that segment from his company's point of view. Once there are various segments identified, evaluated, then the task for the marketers to figure out which ones to target. All the segments that are out there may not be the ones that he can choose to target. So which is why I said there's a difference between the segmentation exercise and targeting, which is, some people say one size fits all, which is undifferentiated mass marketing. For if you take somebody like Avin, which is the government milk company in the state of Tamil Nadu in India, it has milk which of 2-3 types which it sells to everybody across the board, whether it's in different parts of the state or different classes or different income groups or what have you. So it really treats everybody as just a customer of milk. So it's pretty undifferentiated in that sense. There are some who only look at very hardcore niches. Example, there are some high-end dairy product companies which sell ice cream of a very high price. So they are looking at only the high income or those who like to have certain types of ice creams and frozen desserts as their segment. That's much more niche. And there are those who will have multiple segment specialization. For example, they'll have a low priced ice cream, a higher cost ice cream in a cone, ice cream in a cup, ice cream in tubs, and so many flavors and so on and so forth. So they're looking at multiple segments. Now it's up to us as marketers to say, where is it we want to play a role, which segments do we want to attack, why. So that determines how you target the various segments that are A, available out there, and B, that you choose. Now once you do the segmentation, then you decide which ones to target. The next step is, what position do you take within the target market? Now there are two things here, one is your image, which is an absolute kind of a parameter, and two is a position, which is a relative kind of parameter vis-a-vis other competitors in that same target market. So what you need to do to arrive at a position is to figure out who else is out there, what their offerings are, and how do you as a company and specifically your product vis-a-vis the competitor's product compares, and what position you need to take out there. So this is a completely different and more detailed exercise, and many companies and many marketers initially might get a little confused between these three terms, but each of them is, as you can make out, a pretty different exercise, and this particularly is a more involved exercise. So in conclusion, segmentation is a very vital step in being more relevant and competitive. One needs to understand what kind of segments or sub-segments exist within an overall heterogeneous market, and what criteria one must use to kind of slice and dice this heterogeneous market into more clearly identifiable segments. Evaluating those segments is the next key step, figuring out which ones are more viable, and next is, which ones do you target as a marketer, why do you want to choose those segments to target, and finally, what is the positioning that you want to have for your company and product in that particular markets of your choice.